And I think this is back to form. This is the level of season 1. A good story with some social commentary, a good message, and good characters and emotional reactions to them, and a science fiction kind of plot, mystery. In this case, this is kind of a murder mystery. And one of my complaints about the Orville is that it does sometimes feel like it's mimicking the older Star Trek shows a bit too closely. So I'm saying as long as it's not a direct copy of the same exact scenes, then I'm fine with it. As long as it's as good or better or done differently or as a parody of the original, then I'm fine with it. And in some ways, the Orville feels like a distilled version of Star Trek. It's as if they took the best possible ideas while discarding all the bad ideas, and they just even made it better. So it's like a concentrated version of Star Trek and doing them slightly differently, slightly more comedic. For example, the Moclus are kind of like Klingons. They're a society of brutal, very manly men with very strict laws and all of that. So it's kind of like a mashup of the Klingons, maybe a touch of Cardassians, maybe a little Jaffa. Like if you mix Tilk with Worf, you get a Bortus kind of character. And by the way, I love the Moclus. I love the way they act, I love the way they speak. So I love the Moclus themselves, but I kind of hate their society, which is very brutal, very unethical, immoral, you name it. But it's kind of a satire of our society. It's kind of a mockery of all the bad things in our society. So it's kind of like they did with the Cardassians in Star Trek, showing the Cardassians as being brutal dictators and torturers and all of that, but that was a satire of things in humanity. All those dark elements in humanity was represented through the Cardassians. And so the Moclus are also kind of a satire, and this is what the classic Star Trek was always doing. They were using a science fiction plot to actually comment on humanity and to give some kind of a morality tale, morality lesson, to explain some kind of points to people, which was a brilliant way to deal with topics which back then were not even allowed on TV to discuss. That's one of the things that were brilliant in the original Star Trek, also in all kinds of old science fiction movies, like Planet of the Apes, for example, which also was kind of a parody of real topics in society, like the argument between religious orthodox and science, like evolution and stuff like that. So that movie, The Planet of the Apes, was also the same kind of satire of our society today, using science fiction to tell this story. And so this episode of the Orville is also a satire of real issues in society, and done pretty brilliantly. I could say this is done in a very good way to pass that point across, while also containing a lot of other interesting elements. In this case, kind of a murder investigation, and I think it was done brilliantly the way it was tied with the Moclus society. It was done in such a way that we would not guess the plot twist right away. At least I didn't guess it right from the start. And as we learn more about the Moclus culture, then we begin to connect the dots and figure out exactly what's really going on. So I think the way these two elements were tied together was done really brilliantly. And by the way, the new security chief who replaced Alara, I was critical of her in her first appearance. I said I'm not sure if I really like her, but after this episode I think I like her even more than I ever liked Alara, because Alara, she was cute, she was beautiful, but she was never shown as being very clever. She was physically powerful, but her personality never felt powerful and she never seemed that clever, which is not a bad thing for a character. Like, I don't want an overpowered character who is also strong and smart and all of it together. And maybe that duality of Alara was one of the reasons people liked her. Like, she was physically so strong and yet inside she was so naive, so nice. So maybe that kind of contradiction was part of what made her interesting. It's kind of a gentle giant kind of character who is physically strong, but inside not so strong. And so maybe that's one of the reasons that people did like Alara. But if you think about it, if Alara lost all her powers, would you really want her as security chief? I personally probably wouldn't, because she just didn't come across as very confident or very clever or very emotionally strong. And so if not for her powers, maybe I wouldn't want her as a security chief. But with this woman, she didn't even display her powers in this whole episode, and yet she felt much more badass than Alara ever did. And mostly because she's also clever. She figured out a mystery, she solved the puzzle, she connected the dots. So I would want her to be a security chief even with no powers. So in short, I really like her now. And this is an example of how well this show is doing character development. They know how to do it. They know how to make you connect with these characters. Even this new Moclus guy who comes on board, very quickly you connect with him, even on an emotional level. You begin to like him, and so this show is doing that so much better than Discovery. So anyway, this is how it's been done. So let's get to the actual plot. So this new Moclus guy who is there to upgrade some of their ship systems, and people keep saying that he's one of the best engineers of the Moclus, that he's brilliant and so on. That will be important later. And there's a scene between him and Lamar in which Lamar says they cannot modify that ship that way because of some regulation, and then that guy says, forget it, I wrote it. That really reminds me of a scene between Geordi LaForge and Scotty, in which Scotty also said the same thing, that he's the one who wrote those regulations, and therefore you can modify it if you want. So anyway, we see that Tala and this Moclus guy has kind of a thing going on. They kind of look at each other. There's some kind of attraction between them, so that will be important later when he reveals to her that he is actually attracted to her, which is something that is forbidden on his home planet because there are only males there and they are forbidden from feeling attraction to females. That is considered a crime on his planet, so this is an obvious social satire of homosexuality. This really reminds me of the episode in TNG called The Outcast, in which the Enterprise encounters a species of androgynous people who have no males and females, and yet one of the characters reveals in secret to Riker that a few of them actually do have a tendency to be attracted to a male or a female, but it's considered a deviation on their planet, and so it's illegal. And yet she can confide with Riker because he does have a gender, unlike their people, and so there was kind of a thing between Riker and that person. And so we have the same kind of story beginning here, that Moclus tells Tala that he is attracted to her and that on his planet it's considered a crime, it's considered being a deviant, and that's why he only reveals it to people that he thinks also are attracted to him on other planets. So this really reminded me of the TNG episode The Outcast, and also the Deep Space Nine episode called Rejoined, in which Dax wanted to resume her relationship with someone she knew from her past life, which was forbidden in their society. So that was also kind of a satire to society's attitude toward homosexuality, and in that case that was another woman, but no one mentioned the fact that it's because it's two women. People only talked about the thrill way of life and all of that, so it had nothing to do directly with the gender in that episode. But the one in The Outcast, probably the closest thing that Star Trek ever had to discussing the topic of homosexuality. They kind of show the planet in which everything is different, so to that planet it's like all humans seem deviant to them because humans still have genders. So anyway, we have the same kind of story beginning here. So he starts to secretly date Tala and they meet in the holodeck, the simulator, and then we see that someone follows them. So that also happened in the Deep Space Nine episode, that someone followed Jadzia and saw that she's meeting with that other woman. And also we learn that this guy is the ex-boyfriend of Bortus and that Clyden doesn't like him because of that. And then we see that Clyden enters the holodeck while he's alone there. And then the scene changes to Tala, and then she comes back to the holodeck and she sees that the guy is gone, and she replays the simulation and sees that someone actually killed him. Someone vaporized him inside the simulator. And she cannot see exactly who it is because that image is distorted, it's been erased. And that part kind of reminded me of another TNG episode called Identity Crisis, in which Geordi went into the holodeck to investigate something, and there was a mysterious figure there which he couldn't know who that was, what it is, and he tried to get the computer to clean that image. So we have a very similar kind of scene here of a creepy shadowy figure which no one knows who it is. And so I was thinking to myself, why did they reveal to us that it was Clyden? Wouldn't it be more interesting for us not to know who that was? And yet if we know already, there is no mystery. So I realized there's probably going to be another twist, that it's not really Clyden, that someone is trying to frame him. So I guessed that one right away, but I didn't guess the final twist. I didn't realize who it is going to be. And if you don't want spoilers, stop the video here, because I'm going to reveal it. And the surprise is that that guy actually framed his own death, because he knew that he's going to be tried for his so-called crimes on his planet, because Clyden actually threatened to expose him to the authorities. I guess because Clyden didn't like the fact that he might still want Bortus or something. They showed the hostility between them earlier on. Clyden actually threatened to expose him, and then he thought he has nothing to lose. Also, they explain in this episode that in Moclus society, they punish your family for something that you do. And that's also an idea that was mentioned in some Star Trek episode, I think somewhere in Deep Space Nine. There was a guy from the Gamma Quadrant who said in his planet they punish your whole family for something you do. And so the moment they mentioned that in this episode, the dots started connecting. You realize that he was more concerned for his family. He didn't want his family to get punished. And so that guy wanted to find a way to escape persecution, but without punishing his family, because in that culture, if you commit suicide, they also punish your family. And so his only way out was to frame his own death. And he decided to frame Clyden for it, because Clyden wanted to turn him in, and so he was angry at Clyden, so he made that whole elaborate simulation on top of a simulation to try to frame him, which makes sense since they established that he's a very good engineer early on. And so it makes sense for him to be able to do this. And then Lamar says that it was a bit too easy to uncover the identity of the killer, so that makes him suspect that it was all deliberate. And I think I realized what was going on the same moment that Tala did. And that's why I really love Tala, that she's a clever character who manages to figure it out with her own brains and without things being spelled out to her, like a lot of times it's been done on these types of shows. But in this case, she was really did it with her own brain. And I love that because I love smart characters. So I think it was done brilliantly, the way that they explained the Moclus society to us in a way that makes us understand what might have happened. The moment that Bortus said that in their culture suicide is not an option because they will punish your family for it, that moment is when I and also Tala realized what really happened. So that guy basically wanted to escape from his culture. He wanted to pursue his own way of life. He wanted to meet women without the fear of his family getting punished, and so he had to fake his own death. And so he used the simulator to do that, to make it look as if he was vaporized, while meanwhile he was hiding somewhere on the ship. And all of this reminded me of another TNG episode called Suspicions, in which Dr. Crusher was actually doing an investigation to figure out who killed a fellow scientist. And then in the end of that episode, it turned out that that scientist is not really dead, and actually he framed his own death. And in the very end, he reveals himself and confronts her inside the shuttle. And so here we also see Tala finding that guy hiding inside the shuttle, so that reminded me of that TNG episode. But this one is much better because in this one she actually solves the puzzle herself with her own brain. In that episode with Dr. Crusher, I don't think she actually solved the puzzle. I think that guy just revealed himself to her and explained his whole evil plan to her, and then she killed him. So that was less clever in that episode. Because, you know, it's the classic mistake of a villain. Instead of just shooting the hero, instead he has to explain the whole evil plan. So Dr. Crusher never figured out the truth by herself. And so this is an example of the Orville actually being better than Star Trek, because it kind of took inspiration from some of these same ideas, but did them in an even better way, in my opinion. And so he explains his motives. He explains that on his planet he's going to be tried for being a deviant because he's attracted to women, and he begs her to let him go. And I kind of suspected maybe she will because she's sympathetic. On the other hand, he did frame Clyden, and so that's why I do think she did the right thing. And I thought to myself, maybe she will let him go, but also do it in a way that will prove Clyden's innocence, so that he won't go to prison for something he didn't do. But instead she does turn him in, and this is one of the reasons that I think she's a great character, because she's doing her job to the full extent without letting her personal emotions get in the way. Because despite the fact that she liked his guy and she understood him fully, she still carried out her duty first of all. So she did what her job is supposed to do, and that's one of the reasons I think she's a great character. And so that guy gets arrested, and later we see a scene of him going to trial on his home planet. We don't know exactly what happened to him, but presumably he gets punished in some way on his planet. And then we have a scene of Clyden coming to thank Tala for what she did, and she explains to him that she only did her job. And then we have one of the best lines, I think, in the entire show, when she totally verbally abuses Clyden. She blames him for everything, and she's totally right, because all of this started because of Clyden. Because he came to the simulator and threatened to expose that guy to the authorities, that's the only reason he did what he did, in self-defense, basically. And so Clyden is responsible for everything that happened, for that guy now going to jail probably, maybe executed, we don't know exactly, but Clyden is responsible. I was hoping maybe he will have a line in which he says that he didn't really mean to expose him, that he only wanted to scare him, to abuse him, whatever. So I wish they would have added that, because as it is, they kind of ruined the character of Clyden. Like, Clyden was a kind of a nasty guy from the beginning, but now they really made him unlikable after what he did. And so she was totally right in calling him out, and this is one of the best scenes of the entire show, I think. The way she explains to Clyden that that guy didn't do anything bad to anyone. He didn't rape anyone, he didn't do anything bad, he only wanted to be loved, and the delivery in the scene and everything was really brilliant. This is really a good scene, really putting the nail on the head of the entire message of this story, which is that it's wrong to persecute someone for his sexual orientation as long as he's not forcing anyone else to do anything. And so there's nothing bad in anything he did, and therefore it's wrong to put him on trial for that simply because he wanted to love someone and to be loved. This is totally insane to put someone in jail for that alone. I guess in the context of this episode, because that guy tried to frame Clyden, then we can say that he kind of did deserve to get some punishment for what he did. And we don't know exactly the punishment he did receive, so maybe this is kind of a bittersweet ending, because she did solve the mystery, she did put the guilty party under arrest. We don't know the exact punishment he got on the planet, but she also doesn't spare her thoughts from Clyden, and she tells to his face that he's responsible for all of this because of his bigotry, because of his attitude, because he was so hostile toward that person that caused all the trouble in this whole episode. And so I think this whole scene really sealed the deal. It really wrapped this whole episode nicely with a good message in the end. It also kind of reminded me of a lot of times in Star Trek in which after the episode is almost done, there is some kind of scene of someone coming to the observation room to talk with Picard, and Picard offers a few words of wisdom. Like in the episode The Drumhead, for example, in which Worf comes to talk with Picard after that whole so-called trial in which Admiral Satie was attempting to incite against innocent people and put innocent people in jail. After that, we have a scene of Worf coming to Picard to talk with him, and Picard offers a few words of wisdom. So this is very similar to that kind of scene as well, but this is a brand new way of doing that. And so I'm not complaining about the similarities, I'm simply pointing it out, but I do think this was done in a new and even better way than before, and so I'm totally okay with that. And so I think this is one of the best episodes of the Orville. This is the same level as season 1, which was excellent. I really enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and we can discuss it in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, please subscribe, click the notification bell not to miss any of my videos, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye.